Hi everyone, I'm Heather Prophet, and I'm here today to talk to you about intrinsic memory, better known as implicit memory, and different forms of dementia, um, such as Alzheimer's disease, retrograde dementia, frontal lobe dementia, younger dementia, um, Lewy body dementia. There's all different types. There's just different causes, but they all kind of go under one big umbrella group, and that's how they figure it out. But first, let's start with talking about intrinsic or implicit memory, which is your long term memory. And it does act without a lot of conscious thought. It's kind of like riding a bicycle. You never really forget. So different things about implicit memory. This would aid you in dressing yourself, bathing, cleaning, using utensils, driving a car, going to a specific place, things like that along those lines. Real quick, Alzheimer's disease is probably the most common type of dementia there is out there. But Alzheimer's disease and dementia have a lot in common. They both affect thinking, your memory, recalling, remembering things, the use of language, and even behavioral changes. As I said earlier, there are different types of dementia. We went through some of them, but they all have one thing in common, and that is in both cases of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, there is significant damage or breakdown, atrophy of the hippocampus. But this seems to affect more of your explicit memory, which is your short-term memory, than the implicit memory, which is your long-term memory. But the hippocampus is also the main region or crossroad between the implicit and explicit memory, or the networks therein. The hippocampus is also responsible for learning and memory, but like I said, it seems to have more of an effect on your explicit memory short term than it does your long term memory. The implicit memory can be found in the cerebellum and the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia, it's also responsible for fine motor skills, or your regular motor skills, that is. But your implicit memory is automatic and with repetition remembers things. But that's the idea, doing it over and over again, kind of like I mentioned before, riding a bike. Now that we know a little bit more about the implicit memory, I'm here to argue that despite dementia, Alzheimer's, things like that, your implicit memory seems to last. It's the explicit memory that goes, that doesn't quite function when you have those diseases. But somehow the implicit memory allows you to still remember. To do this, I'm going to use music to prove my point and to kind of show you. There was, in fact, a study done in Rio de Janeiro by Sergio Macado, from the Brazilian Institute of Neurobioscience. And there were several other of his colleagues that also looked into this and said that the explicit and implicit parts of the brain act separately from each other, and despite having Alzheimer's disease, the implicit memory stays well intact and active. To switch gears again and to argue my point, there was a man, Clive Waring, Dr. Oliver Sacks, studied him and was trying to help and everything. Dr. Sachs is a neurologist, naturalist, historian of science, and he's also a writer. He is from Britain, and so is Clive Waring, his patient. Clive Waring suffered from kind of two different types, but the main one was retrograde amnesia. Retrograde amnesia is where you can't remember the past. And he had it pretty bad. He couldn't remember things that happened a few seconds ago. But it says he also suffered from anterograde amnesia, which is you cannot create new memories. So something that comes along, let's say it sticks in our memory, but with him, it just wouldn't be there. But the fascinating thing about him was that he could play music. You could stick a sheet of music right to the piano. He was a pianist, a conductor, a musicologist, and he could play that song even though he would look at people and go, I don't remember this, I can't do this, but somehow he was able to remember how to play that music on the piano, which was quite fascinating. And if you're interested in learning more about this, the article, The Abyss, was by Dr. Oliver Sacks. And you can read more about that experience that he went through. Another person that I looked into was a former ballerina. She was from Spain. Her name, and hopefully I get this right without butchering it, Marta Senta Gonzalez Saldana. She was diagnosed with both early onset vascular dementia and Alzheimer's disease in 2014. But there's a video of her on YouTube that you can look up. She was dancing to Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. Even though she was in a wheelchair, they played that music for her. And it was like something else just kicked in, and she was able to remember the dance moves. Even though she was in a wheelchair, she just danced, you know. She was recalling what she had once did. She worked for the New York Ballet in the 1960s. But to me, it kind of proves that despite everything, music is somehow triggering something that allows them to remember, especially when it comes to past memories of playing an instrument or perhaps recalling something they've done for years. But in fact, there was an article on dementia music by Ami Bard and Savirni Sampson. Once again, forgive me for the names. They found several studies that show music helps with cognition in patients suffering from dementia. They also found that people who were musicians, like Clive Waring, that it affected the brain in a greater way. Areas of the brain such as the primary auditory cortex, primary and premotor regions, the cerebellum, and the anterior corpus callosum. Another study, also in music, done by Yenxing Zhang and his colleagues, there was a positive outcome that music therapy actually does have an effect on patients with dementia. They were showing how music therapy not only helps with depression and anxiety, but can help with those who suffer from dementia, different types of dementia, which is quite fascinating. So Clive Waring and Marta may have suffered from different types of dementia, but still they were able to perform tasks they'd done for years and years. And that basically has to do with the implicit memory, holding those long-term memories and then them coming out and still remembering, even though, you know, the brain is being affected by the dementia. So, like I said, this makes me think that music really can help. And Sergio Montoya, who and his colleagues, who were interested in studying this, who found that the explicit memory and the implicit memory, your long-term memory, are separate and different. It just has to do with the repetition, doing it over and over again. So thank you so much for your time. And like I said, I'll leave the links to this video at the bottom. So if you're interested in learning more, it certainly is out there. Thank you so much.